I didn't flinch when the HOA president slammed her fist on the table and called me a liar. I didn't bother responding to her accusations of fraudulent paperwork or tampering with community property. I just slid the folded document across the oak conference table. The room went very still as their lawyer adjusted his glasses and started to read. His lips moved at first, tracing the legal phrasing line by line, but the color drained from his face halfway through. He stopped, looked at me, then back at the page. And in that silence, every smug board member realized what I had just handed over, the original county deed, dated decades earlier, that proved the cul-de-sac they thought they owned had never belonged to them at all. It belonged to me, and by extension, to every homeowner who had bought into this neighborhood under a false assumption. I wasn't always the type to carry old property deeds around like weapons. Truth is, I had no interest in battles, legal or otherwise. When I first moved out here, it was for peace. I'd inherited a modest little house at the end of a sleepy street, tucked against the circle where the cul-de-sac opened up like a small stage. It wasn't grand, but it felt grounded, safe. I had space to park my truck, space to plant tomatoes, and space to just breathe. I liked walking out in the evenings when the sun dipped behind the pines, listening to the cicadas start up. My only ambition was quiet, no commute traffic, no city politics, no noise. I figured if I paid my dues, kept the grass trimmed, and minded my own business, they would leave me alone. I didn't crave power. I craved a little corner of the world where no one bothered me. That illusion cracked the day. I found a bright orange notice duct taped to my front door. The message wasn't polite. It accused me of unauthorized modifications for replacing my own mailbox, the rusted-out tin thing the previous owner had left behind. I laughed at first, thinking it had to be some mistake. But then came the follow-up email, then the fine. Then another notice claiming that my truck was an eyesore when parked in front of my house, despite the fact that half the board owned boats they left on trailers in their driveways. It was absurd, petty, and confusing. Why would anyone care about my mailbox or the angle of my parking job on a road nobody but us used? I tried to be reasonable. I wrote back. I sent polite emails, even quoted their own bylaws, which clearly allow vehicle parking on residential streets. I went to a board meeting, sat in a folding chair, and asked calmly if this was really the kind of issue worth policing. They smirked, shrugged, and told me rules were rules. The fines didn't stop. In fact, they multiplied suddenly. I was accused of failure to maintain my lawn, though I mowed every Saturday. Then, as if they were running out of ideas, they threatened to tow my truck for trespassing in the cul-de-sac circle, even though it was the only practical place to park when resurfacing work closed off my driveway. Each letter was nastier than the last, written not in the language of neighborliness but in threats. Legal action will be pursued. Liens may be filed. At first it just felt surreal. Then it became exhausting. I made one last effort to appeal to reason. I asked for a sit-down, just me and the president. She declined. I sent copies of county parking ordinances. No response. I asked them to show me the legal description of the property lines around the circle. They sent back a one-line email. The cul-de-sac is common property of the HOA. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't angry, not outwardly, but I stopped wasting words. I stopped asking. Instead, I started researching. If they wanted to talk about property rights, then property rights would be the battlefield. And unlike them, I had patience. I spent nights at the county recorder's office, paging through brittle maps and hand-drawn plats that dated back to when the subdivision was carved out of old farmland. I traced surveys, I copied documents, I read every ordinance tied to road easements and cul-de-sac maintenance. I requested certified copies of the original subdivision deed, something most people wouldn't even know existed. That's when the first crack appeared in their story. The developer who built this place in the late 70s had filed an odd Addendum 1 that exempted the circle of the cul-de-sac from the HOA's maintenance responsibilities. It wasn't theirs. It wasn't county land either. It was deeded as a shared right-of-way held in common by the adjacent lot owners, the very people, like me, who lived around it. meaning their claim to own the circle was a lie. That discovery set off a chain reaction. I started documenting every fine they had issued related to the circle parking, paving, trespassing. I found old receipts from neighbors who had paid for repairs the HOA claimed to have funded, when in reality, the HOA had no authority to spend money on that space. I spoke quietly with a retired neighbor who remembered the original developer, and he confirmed the arrangement. The circle was never meant to be HOA controlled. It was a concession to the homeowners themselves. Piece by piece, I built the file. It took months, and in that time, the HOA didn't let up. They escalated. They issued a notice threatening to sell part of the cul-de-sac to a developer who wanted to expand his adjacent property, a move they claimed was perfectly within their rights. That was their fatal mistake, because by then I had every document I needed. I wasn't bluffing. I had the chain of title, the deed language, the right-of-way agreements, even the county commissioner's memo acknowledging the exemption. So when the HOA called an emergency meeting to announce their deal with the developer, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I waited until the president declared the circle community property being transferred for a fair market value. Then I unfolded the certified deed on the table. The county stamp glistened under the fluorescent lights. Their lawyer read it once, twice, and then closed his folder without a word. The president's face went red. She sputtered something about interpretation and outdated filings, but the deed was clear. They had no right to sell what they never owned. And every homeowner sitting in those chairs knew it. The fallout came quickly. The developer backed out within a week. No one wants to buy into contested land with potential litigation hanging over it. The HOA lawyer quietly resigned from representing them, citing conflicts of interest. Homeowners, suddenly aware they'd been paying fines for years on a space they legally owned themselves, demanded refunds. A few even threatened to sue the board personally. Within 3 months, 2 board members had stepped down. The president clung to her role for a while, but the credibility was gone. She stopped sending me notices. She stopped looking me in the eye at the grocery store. Eventually, I heard she moved out altogether. The neighborhood is different now, quieter. Nobody argues when I park my truck in the circle, because it's as much mine as theirs. The new board doesn't bother with petty fines. They barely meet at all. Most people are too embarrassed to talk about what happened, but I don't need them to. I got my peace back. I got my evenings, my tomatoes, my little house at the edge of the circle. And the irony is, the HOA did me a favor. By pushing so hard, they forced me to uncover the truth that the very ground they thought they controlled had always belonged to us. The people living here now, when I drive through that circle, I sometimes catch neighbors watching from their porches. Some wave, some look away. Either way, I don't mind, because the circle is still there and it's ours. And every time my tires roll over that pavement, I remember the silence in that boardroom when the lawyer realized the deed was real. That silence was worth more than any apology. It was the sound of power leaving their hands and landing back where it belonged.